Welcome to the Shark Bone Podcast. This is Pod Chatter episode number 22 being recorded on Saturday, January 14th, 2017. My name is Devin.
And I'm Christopher.
And we're back for our second recorded episode of the year 2017. And I turned 35 in 2 days.
Right. Happy birthday. Almost.
Thanks. Yeah, it's almost birthday. I took the day off work, and I'm going to take my family back up to the SeaQuest aquarium thing that we've got going on here that we bought a year membership to. So we're going to go have some fun trying to feed and touch some sharks.
Nice.
It should be good. Yeah.
Sounds like fun.
It will be. I'm glad to have a 3-day weekend. Axel and I are already making plans to stream a game of Shadow of the Demon Lord at some point this weekend as well. Because he really wants to be a podcaster, a YouTube star as well.
Cool. Well, I gotta say, your kid's got some talent.
He's funny, and he enjoys it.
Redemption in season 2 of Redemption. I don't remember which episode it was, but like as soon as he came on, I'm like, oh my god. Listen to that kid. He's good.
He did a really good job. And it was like first take almost for everything that Kendall used on that episode. I'd be like, okay, Axel, this is your line. Go ahead and read it. And so he'd read it and then he'd say it. And my favorite one was, that's a bad word, because I was like, now just remember you're reacting to someone using a bad word, so you got to say that's a bad word. And he just goes, that's a bad word, and like clipping on both sides. His audio is like, I'm like, whoa, I don't know if he's going to be able to use that, so why don't you tone it down a little bit? So then he says it again, and then Kendall was like, no, I'm using the first one. That one's perfect.
Yeah, he did a really great job on that one. So
he did.
He definitely has a voice for podcasting.
He does.
Let me rephrase that, because that's usually used as a derogatory. You're ugly, but you have a good voice. He has a promising future in voice acting.
That would be nice. And whatever he chooses to do, it's just he's having fun with that right now. And he's grown up watching YouTubers play video games, and so I guess he thinks that it's a normal thing to just talk constantly while you're playing video games. So like sometimes I'll even catch him. He's like on his Nintendo DS, 3DS or something, and he's just laying on his bed playing video games, and he's talking to an invisible audience. And I'm like, who are you talking to? And he's like, oh, no one. And I'm like, you're talking to someone? He's like, no, I'm just practicing.
Nice.
It's like, all right, that works.
As long as he knows what he's doing, that's the important thing.
Yeah, he has fun doing it. So whatever. But anyways, our Pod Chatter episodes are when Christopher and I get together and we just talk about something nerdy, geeky, whatever. The plan for today is to talk about using our Sandcastle episodes to actually run an adventure. But we got on before it was time to launch, and we started talking about some plans we have for the season break and next season as well, with our APs and a new show we're going to be adding. And then we started talking about dice. So we decided to hit record and start going and talk about more dice. So let's go ahead and give some background on what we were talking about. We were talking about the Fantasy Flight Star Wars game, about how my experiences with the dice, it always ends up being a wash. Too often I roll the dice for Fantasy Flight Star Wars and I get nil on the dice. And the 2 times I've played it, the GM's always said, well, that's a failure because you got no successes. And I've always had the argument, I didn't get any failures either, so how can it be a failure? There's no failure showing on the dice. It's just a wash, which is not very interesting because nothing happens. But the GM rules it a failure, and so that irritates me as well, because then the system is more weighted to failure, because in my experience, I'm failing more often than I'm actually succeeding, and that's not Star Wars to me anyway.
Right. Yeah. So if there's no failure symbols and no success symbols, it should be like in Fate, you can succeed at a cost.
Yeah, but I don't. Is that written in the Fantasy Flight rules? I don't know.
No, the rules are pretty straightforward. In order to succeed, you have to have at least one uncanceled success symbol.
Oh, okay. So in the
So
rules, it is
yeah,
weighted towards the failure like that.
right. So if you have no success symbols, then you do not succeed.
Okay.
But in my experience in role playing games in general, not specifically Fantasy Flight, is that GMs tend to call for rolls for really silly things, or players say, "Hey GM, can I roll for this?" This is like one of my pet peeves is like, having the GM say, "All right, everyone, give me a perception check." Well, if and the GM hopes someone succeeds so they can tell us what we would
Mhm.
normally see anyway. But it's like, hey, people like rolling dice. Let's call for checks. But if there's a very low chance of failure, or if failure is uninteresting, there's no point in rolling the dice. You just tell them what happens. Because you call gaming story, if you don't mind me going off on a bit of a tangent.
That's what these
Okay.
pod chatters are about.
Right. So the classic Serenity role-playing game. This was like, back in 2000 mid-aughts.
Long, long ago in the before times.
Right. Back, it was pretty close to after the Serenity movie was in theaters. That's how long ago it was. It was Cortex, but it was Cortex Classic, not the Cortex Plus that we talk about all the time. And so they had a slightly different use for plot points. You could spend plot points, spend 1 plot point, add a D2, 2 plot points, add a D4, 3 plot points, add a D6, and all that to a roll to make sure it succeeded. But the system was kind of it was the idea of immediate gains versus long-term gains, because any unused plot points at the end of the session turned into extra bonus experience points.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So this was the second session, and we were doing a flashback of how we got the crew together. And so at the very end of the session, the GM called for a perception check. And I'm like, okay, this is the last roll of the game. This is something very important. I'm going to blow 5 plot points to add a D10 to my roll.
Okay.
Because I want to make sure I succeed, because this sounds important.
Reasonable. Yeah.
So I spend the plot points. I add it to the roll. I succeed at my check. And he says, as you're walking on the ship, you notice the plaque, and it has the name of your ship on it. I'm like,
what?
Really? I just blew 5 experience points on a roll to tell me something I already knew. And it's like, what is if I fail, what happens? I don't see a plaque that says the name of the ship that I already know, because this is how we got our ship. That's what the whole adventure was about. Telling the story of how we all got together and we got our ship.
So that's a little silly.
Yeah. And
well, that's more than silly. That's fucking ridiculous.
Right. And I know that's an extreme example, but it's still an example of GMs call for too many rolls. Players ask to make too many rolls. So the dice should only come out when failure is interesting.
Yeah, and that's something I learned from Burning Wheel, and I've tried to internalize it into my GMing style, is their say yes or roll the dice that they grabbed from, I think it was Dogs in the Vineyard.
Yeah, I think so.
But either way, the idea is player says, hey, I want to do this. You either say yes or you have them roll dice for it. And of course, that's not applicable in 100% of the situations, because sometimes they say they want something really outlandish and you just have to say no, because it doesn't make any sense. But generally, when someone says, hey, I want to try this, I either say, yes, that's great, that happens, or I say, okay, something interesting could happen if you fail, or it's interesting if complications arise while you're trying to do this, so go ahead and roll some dice. And me, when I call for a perception roll, a lot of times I'm thinking this is a clue they have to find, something I brought in from Gumshoe. There are core clues that they must find, but I like calling for rolls to find them, because they either find it with no problem or they find it and something bad happens.
Right. And those types of things I'm totally behind, because you're not rolling for success or failure. You're rolling for complication or smooth sailing.
And that's something I learned from Smallville, which is why I love calling for rolls in Smallville, because it's just like, yeah, we could sit here and we could role play all the messy drama we want all day, but I want you to roll those ones, because then I get to say really juicy shit happens and we get to throw wrenches into the machine left and right. So roll them dice.
Yeah, it's like that yes but idea.
Yeah.
And that was actually shortly after Marvel Heroic first came out. I was playing at my local gaming store down in Austin at Dragon's Lair. Shout out to Dragon's Lair, woo! And the GM, explained his GMing style in the very beginning. It was like, all right, this is how I run things. If a roll is necessary, before you roll, you tell me what happens on a success and what happens on a failure.
Okay.
And if you can't think of anything good for either of them, no roll is needed.
Sure.
So it's like, I want to make a perception check to see if they're hiding weapons on them. Okay, what happens if you succeed? Obviously, I notice that they have weapons. What happens if you fail? Well, no one said that this person was packing heat, but if I fail, they have a concealed weapon.
Yeah.
Which makes it interesting, because if you didn't make the roll, then the GM probably wasn't planning on them busting out a gun and shooting people, or a sword and slicing people up, depending. But you're like, so you are invested in both success and failure. And like we were just talking a little bit ago with the idea of sometimes you're rolling for success, failure, like most combat mechanics, if you succeed, you do damage. If you fail, you don't. But for other things, you're rolling to see if you do it without any complications or if you do it with a complication. So I'm making that perception check to find the right clue. If I fail, I find the clue, but it takes a long time, but we're caught, but I leave a clue behind that says I was here, but ninjas kicked down this door and we're no longer, doing it sneakily. If you're breaking in looking for something, you get caught, or, it's not just you find it, you don't find it. It's you find it and you get the hell out of there really quick. No harm, no foul. Or some complication occurs and you just have to, ask yourself that question every time you call for a dice roll. What happens on a success? What happens on a failure? And if you can't come up with interesting things for both, then it's not worth rolling for.
Yeah, I think I would say that it's not that important to have interesting things happen on a success, because they're already rolling for a reason and they have a goal in mind. So we know that happens on a success, and it might not be super interesting. It might just be advancing the plot, which is going to create more interest.
Right. But at the same time, players and GMs are not always on the same page. So
Yes,
the players
you're
like
correct.
talking to an informant who happens to be indebted to the characters or infatuated with one of the characters, or for some reason is very open and helpful with the PCs. And so a player's like, hey, I'm going to make a diplomacy check to get him to tell me what I want to know. Well, there's no reason to make that check, because the GM had already decided that the NPC is going to be helpful and will give up that information. No roll needed.
Yeah. And that's another lesson that Burning Wheel has, is discussing the results of a failure before the roll is even made. Because then you can also have the player buy into that failure beforehand, instead of, those times where a GM calls for a roll, someone rolls it, and then the GM says, you failed, this horrendous thing happens. And the player's like, what? How is that a result of this failure? That doesn't make any sense to me. And if they discussed that before making the roll, the player would have said, no, that's not acceptable. I'm not making this roll. Or could have suggested something else.
Right. And if you'll excuse me real quick, I am looking something up, because I think, because I spend a lot of time on the RPG Stack Exchange, where it's kind of a Q&A website.
Okay.
People have questions with definitive answers, objectively definitive answers, not like, what do you think about this? Because that's subjective. But how does the rules say to do this? Or, hey, I heard that there's rules for this, but I can't find it. Can you tell me where it's at? That kind of thing. And a lot of people come to Stack Exchange with saying, hey, my players are doing this and this and this, and it's, the bard with the plus 20 diplomacy at first level is having everyone in the world do their bidding because they roll well.
Mhm.
But in D&D 5e specifically, looking at the player's handbook, page 6, how to play. 1, the DM describes the environment. 2, the players describe what they want to do. 3, the DM narrates the result of the adventure's action. And then it says for part 3, you describe the result. Describing the result often leads to another decision point, which brings you back to step 1. In certain situations, the action is more structured in players. Where is it? Damn it. Maybe that wasn't the part I was looking for.
That's not the page you're looking for.
Right? Damn it. I thought that was it. But and it says, oh wait, so I figured out where I'm getting at, so just stick with me. So how to play. Number 1, DM describes the environment. Number 2, the player describes what they want to do. Number 3, the DM narrates the result. So DM describes, player describes, DM narrates. No rules come into play, no dice are rolled, no nothing. Because you make a dice roll when there is a chance of failure, when something might go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to see where it actually talks about deciding when to make a dice roll, but I'm not.
Well, most systems say the player says, I do this, and then the GM says, I'm not so sure you do. And those are the times where you call for a roll. When they say, I jump across this 20-foot chasm, and the GM says, I don't know, can you really do that? Let's see if your character can. Make a roll.
Right. And that's one of those things where you have to decide on, is it something that just happens and say it happens? Is it something that just can't happen? For example, I jump over for example, I flap my wings and fly away. Yeah, no, that doesn't happen. No matter how hard you try, no matter how high your athletics check is, you're not going to fly without a flying mount or spell or magic item or something.
Yeah, show me the spell you're using.
Yeah, and on the same token, just because you have a plus 20 diplomacy or charm or whatever the skill is for whatever system you're using, just because you're really good at convincing people of things doesn't mean that someone is able to be convinced.
Mm-hmm.
Just because the bard rolls very well, thank you, doesn't mean that the big bad is going to change his evil ways. They are determined to see the world burn. Devin's waving at you.
Cool, I waved at him already.
Oh, okay.
That's why he waved.
And so, like in D&D, they have the disposition of NPCs. Are they indifferent? Are they helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they antagonistic? That's not the right words, but there's like 5 grades. Hostile. There you go.
Yeah, I'm playing a D20 game right now, so
yeah, and that's like one of the things that people often overlook is a hostile NPC is not going to surrender his army to you just because you roll a 35 on your intimidation check. If anything, it's going to make them more mad and have them attack you immediately.
In most D20 games, if you look at the attitude chart for a hostile enemy, there is no DC listed for a diplomacy check because you cannot make that roll. He will not listen to you no matter what.
Exactly. And so sorry.
It's all right. We kind of started this because you had a point about fate dice. Did you want to make that, or are we good to go into sandcastles?
Yeah, I'm always willing to talk more about fate. Because you were saying how since the fate dice are weighed towards 0, sometimes it feels like a waste of time to roll the dice because what is it, like 60% of the time you're gonna have an outcome of 0, and so you're gonna get your skill level.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one of the reasons why I love fate so much more than D20, because if I have a great skill of +3, then I am So more than 50% of the time, I'm going to get at least a 3, if not higher.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, so I'm going to be more competent more regularly than with a D20, where I have the same amount of chance of, if I have a +5 bonus, I have the same chance of rolling a 6 as I do of rolling a 25.
Yeah.
Because it's a linear progression, and mathematically speaking, linear progressions aren't good for. Okay, can't really say mathematically speaking, but in my experience, linear progressions are not as fun at the table because you have just as much chance of fucking up as you do of being a badass.
It's very
And
swingy.
Yeah, I personally don't like that. I am, Fate, you are competent heroes. You're competent heroes leading dramatic lives.
Indeed. And
I'm sorry, but a competent fighter does not miss 5% of the time.
I was just going to bring that up. In the D20 rules, it's like the most epic level 20 person has a 5% chance of screwing up every single roll they make, whereas the lowliest of commoners has a 5% chance of getting an epic attack on anyone.
Exactly.
Where if a first level commoner went up against a 20th level wizard, that commoner should have no chance. But with the rules, he's got a 5% chance.
5% chance every time.
Mm-hmm, every time. So games with bell curves are more regular.
Yes.
That's the only word I could think of, but it fits.
Consistent.
Yes, consistent. That's a better word.
Right.
Regular, I think of going to the bathroom, and that's not really what I want to think of when I'm rolling dice.
Exactly. And games with a X dice plus adds are more consistent than games with X dice plus Y dice. For example, GURPS uses 3d6 and for every roll, and just the more skill you have, the better chance you are at succeeding. But the curve is the same. You're going to get between a 3 and an 18. But old school D6 Star Wars, you could be rolling 2d6, you could be rolling 8d6, you could be rolling 20d6. So you don't have as much of a, in D&D 5e terms, bounded accuracy, because there's no real upper limit to how many dice you can be rolling. And if you're rolling 10d6, you could roll a 10, you could roll a 60, and that's a large difference. And granted, in D6 Star Wars, hitting the difficulty number exactly and succeeding by 20 points normally doesn't have any impact. It's a straight up success fail, so it's not that big a deal. But so that's another reason why I like Fate, is because you're rolling 4 Fate dice. Your dice results are between -4 and +4. And for starting character in Fate, you have a maximum of +4 bonus. Of course, you can invoke aspects to get higher bonuses, but those are dice modifiers, not normal. They're not applying to every roll. So bell curve, yes. Linear, very swingy.
Yes, it is. It is.
Which is also one of the reasons why I prefer Shadow of the Demon Lord over D&D, is that you get boons and banes. So you're literally rolling more dice. And since boons and banes, you just take the highest number to add or subtract your roll, you still have that limited, you're going to roll anywhere from 1 to 20 on the D20, plus or minus up to 6. And then whatever your skill level is, which is probably going to be like 3 or 4 at lower levels. So you could get, with a really good roll and a really high ability score at like level 1, you could roll 30.
But
Not
very
likely.
rarely are you going to get higher than that.
Right.
Ever.
That's kind of the upper limit. And rolling higher than 20 A 20 or higher usually gives you kicker, but not always. So sometimes rolling that 25 is helpful. Sometimes it doesn't matter if you get a 25 or a 12.
Yeah, and that's why Shadow of the Demon Lord has turned into Axel's favorite fantasy RPG, because the dice are so much easier to understand.
Right.
And there's not tons and tons and tons of numbers to add up, which, he enjoys math, but it still takes him a little bit to add up a slew of 3.5 bonuses to figure out what he rolled on the D20. Whereas Shadow of the Demon Lord, he just rolls some dice and says, 18.
Yep. And it's with the Forbidden Rules supplements. I don't know if you've picked that one up yet. It's the tome of optional rules and things that Rob Schwab thought about and decided against it because of one reason or another. There are a lot of rules in there to make things even simpler. For example, simplified weapon damage is you just, instead of rolling dice, you're expected to roll average. So if you have a weapon that does D6 damage, you're doing 3. You have a 2D6 weapon, you're doing 7. And so there's no dice rolling for that. If you want to do the simplified, quote unquote, simplified boons and banes, you cancel them out as normal, but you don't roll extra dice. The first 1 boon gives you +3, 2 boons gives you +4, 3 more boons give you +5. Same with banes. The first one is 3, then the next one makes it 4, and then any more makes it a 5.
Yeah.
So it's less dice rolling. You're just like, oh, I've got 3 banes. I'm at -5 to my roll.
Yeah. Cool. Shall we get into sandcastles?
Sure.
Sandcastle. So anyone who's not familiar with our Sandcastle episodes, they are the episodes in which Christopher and I create an adventure for one of the districts in the Sharkbone Podcast Sandbox. And most recently, yesterday, in fact, yesterday was a Sandbox episode, so I guess it was 2 weeks ago. Hell, I don't remember when it was. But so sandcastles are where we come up with a hook, and that's the thing you throw in front of your players to get them interested in the adventure. And then we have another section called What's Going On. So we talk about what's really going on behind it, because it's my opinion that hooks are great, but if you as the GM don't know what's actually going on, you can't guide the story. So that's the next thing we figure out after we have the hook. And then we have 2 twists, and then we talk about opposition. And that is a pretty good framework. At least it's worked pretty well for me running, and that's actually how I prep all of my games now. But when I mentioned using it, Christopher, it was several weeks ago, Christopher said, well, hey, it would be nice to have an insight into how you do that, because I don't know if you had tried to use it and had trouble, or if you just didn't know where to start. I don't know. But I thought it would make a good episode instead of me trying to write something up, because I don't think I'm very good at writing articles. I'm a podcaster. It's what I do.
Yep. It's easier to talk it out.
It is, at least for me. I'm very much a talky person. I talk to people in my job. I talk to people in airports. I talk to anyone I can talk to if I'm feeling social. Otherwise, I just give them my blank face, which I've been told is very intense, and walk away. So, have you ever tried to use an adventure in the format of what we create for Sandcastle, whether it be one we've created for Sandcastle or anything in that kind of format?
I've noodled it over a few times on, but I don't want to talk too much about it because it's an adventure that I hope to run you through in the future. So don't want to talk too much about it, but so I've kind of spent some time, driving to work and in the shower, and just like when I have nothing better to do, I'm like, okay, so he's talked about this and we've done a few times. How exactly would this work for me? But I've never actually sat down and penned it out.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is the way I do it, because I do my session brainstorming in the format of the Sandcastle episodes right now. I'm actually working through my next session of Star Wars Saga that I'm going to run on Monday. And I did it in this thing. I said, okay, first, what's the hook? The hook is, let me see if I can remember what I came up with. You know what? I've got it on City of Brass.
Nice.
Let me pull it right up. Because then I can kind of walk everyone through how I do it, because I am in the process of doing it and I've got it all written down. And I think that'll be the easiest way. Search for the Tarakudo. Here we go. GM notes. And I love that I can create private text on City of Brass, because then I just created a district for my entire game, and there's a bunch of public stuff that's player facing, and then anything that's GM facing, I just make it a private note, and then only I could see it. All right, so the hook is they follow the trail of this ship that they're, of the ship that they're trying to find out in the outer rims, and they discover the top of a buried pyramid. And there's evidence there that a ship was parked there for a while. So the idea is they're going to try and figure out, what ship was here, why was it here, what's going on. So then what's going on is that the Tarakuda was here for a while. The captain went into this pyramid and he found some more advanced crystals and left. So that's what's going on. My first twist is when they go into the pyramid, there's an earthquake and a cave-in. So they're going to be stuck in this pyramid. The second twist is that they find hyperdrive parts from the Tarakudo.
Cool.
And then for the opposition, I listed warning of an earthquake, just so that the earthquake doesn't catch them off guard, because you always want to hint at problems before they actually happen.
Right. You need to, how does...
Foreshadowing.
You need to, Powered by the Apocalypse has a term of preview future badness or something.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I'm also going to preview some future badness that's going to happen in a later session, because I'm trying to make sure that all these sessions feel connected. So the next opposition is Como the Hutt's men are asking about the Tarakudo too. So they're going to hear rumors that Como the Hutt's men, who are also looking for one of my PCs, are on the trail of this ship that they're trying to find. So they know they're going to run into them. Opposition is trying to get down into the temple because there's no easy way. There's going to be giant worms in the temple. There's a cave-in. There's ancient computer systems, ancient door locks. There's poisonous air. There's traps, and there's ancient defender droids.
Nice.
So this is all the stuff that I came up with when I was just brainstorming. And brainstorming usually only takes me a good half hour, if that, when I'm sitting down to just figure out what is going to happen during the session. And then the real work comes in, because doing the brainstorming and stuff is just making the framework, and I can't run a game with just the framework. Now I have to start putting the work into it. I've got to take a look at my opposition and figure out which items need to have stat blocks attached to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I create those stat blocks and I attach them to it. I got to figure out, what DCs are for traps, what the trap looks like.
Yeah.
I'm actually making a little top-down side view map of the temple and trying to figure out how many floors are on each of the sections and what are on those floors. I'm planning out rooms, because even though I'm not going to make a map, I want it to feel like a dungeon crawl, just because I've never done a dungeon crawl in Star Wars. And I think that would be interesting. So, and then once I've got stat blocks for that, what I tend to do is I put things in order. And I say, obviously lowering yourself down into the temple is going to happen before you run into any of the defender droids. So that's going to be a top level challenge, on top of my bullet points. And I put them generally in the order that I want them to appear during the game. I don't order the twists, because the twists happen whenever I need to inject some interest into the game. Like if we're playing through something and things start to feel a little stale, or the players are like, all right, we're in this situation, but we don't know what to do. We don't know where to go. Then I throw a twist in, because those twists throw interest back in the game and they point a certain direction.
Okay, so the twists are kind of the ninjas jump through the window and start stabbing people.
Yeah.
So if you throw in when things start slowing down, it's not a specific when this happens, this twist is shown.
Exactly. At least that's how I run it. I mean, I think the first twist you could definitely plan out when it's going to happen, because the first twist is usually what puts them in the situation they're going to be in. In this case, they're going to be trapped in a pyramid, and that happens in the first twist. So I'm pretty certain when that's going to happen. Once they drop down into the pyramid and they start looking around, earthquake, cave in, they're trapped. The second twist, that'll happen whenever. If they start to get bored, unlocking doors, disabling traps, fighting defender droids, then they come across the area where the pilot of this Tarakudo left the old hyperdrive parts that he replaced with these crystals he found underneath this pyramid. Because the whole thing about the Tarakudo, and I hope none of my players listen to this. If you are, there's a spoiler right here, so don't listen unless you don't care about spoilers.
Well, hopefully this is going to air after you run the adventure, right?
Well, yes, but they're not going to find the Tarakudo until maybe like session 6, and this is just going to be session 2.
Okay.
But the thing with the Tarakudo is that Black Sun hired this engine designer to design this really fast engine, this really fast hyperdrive. And so he designed it, and he found these crazy ass crystals on this planet and replaced some of the parts with those crystals. And now the hyperdrive's even faster. And then he decided, you know what? It's probably not a good idea for this criminal organization to have a hyperdrive this fast. And so he went rogue, and they sent the PCs out to find him without telling them that he went rogue.
Okay.
So that's what's going on the grand scale.
So they think it's a search and rescue when it's actually a kidnap.
Yeah, essentially. So that's how I prep a sandbox episode. I know I kind of went through that pretty fast, and I hope it wasn't confusing. But do you have any questions on how I do that?
Okay, so the hook is the opening scene.
Yes, essentially.
So it's like, here's the adventure I have planned for today. This is why you should be interested.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so when writing it, you start with what's going on, and then use that to kind of decide the rest of them.
Yeah. I've always been better at coming up with hooks than I have been at coming up with stories. And that's, in the past, that's what's been so problematic with my GMing, is that I have great hooks that get people interested, but then I have no idea where it's going. And so the game is just a meandering mess.
Okay.
And I'm trying to get better at that, which is why I developed this format for me.
Okay.
So I come up with the hook first, and then I figure out, okay, this is the hook. What's really going on? But if people figure out, if they work better figuring out what's going on and then figuring out how to tie the players into it, then they can do it in either order. I just find it easier to do the hook than what's going on.
All right. So if you don't mind, I'd just like to run through really quick session making.
Yeah.
Using this formula to so I ran this adventure for Shadow of the Demon Lord at a Catacon. It was kind of an abbreviated thing. You know, I ran I did character generation, level 0 and level 1 all within like 3 hours.
Oh, okay.
It was a level 1 adventure that I'd kind of been noodling about and trying to figure out how to do. I'm like, whatever, we'll just do it. So the adventure was tentatively entitled Rat Men in the Sewers.
Okay.
Because very tropey thing is PCs are hired to clear out rats in the sewers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what's really going on is, excuse me, what's really going on is there is a rat man trying to take over the town.
Oh.
He's stealing food. He's Pied Pipering the local vermin. and he's trying to run the humans out of what he sees as his domain.
Okay.
Okay, so the hook was, I started off because it was the first time playing for 3 of the 4 players. So I started off with something simple. There has been a food shortage for some reason in your town. Everybody give me a strength challenge roll, and if you fail, you are debilitated because of your hunger.
Okay.
I don't remember the name of the condition, but you're taking a bane on all your rolls until you eat a good meal.
Mm-hmm.
So the hook is people are hungry.
All right.
And since these were level 1, and it's a small town in the middle of nowhere, it's not like they have caravans coming in and out, so they can just, buy an outrageous amount of food for an outrageous amount of money because no one's coming through and they didn't have any money.
Okay.
And so the opposition was the Rat Man, who is, the leader in charge of everything. He had some Doberman-sized giant rats, and of course, he had rat swarms because swarms are always good.
Uh-huh.
So I had the opposition, I had the what's actually going on, and I had the hook.
Okay.
So then I don't think I had a first twist, but the second twist was the first twist was they were at a tavern trying to get a good meal, and a giant rat is running away with a bag of food, like a sack of potatoes or grain or something like that.
Okay.
So they were walking down the street and they see this giant rat running away from the tavern with a bag of food.
Okay.
The second twist was they found a hole in a grain silo leading to, it was more underground caves than it was sewers because, a small town that big doesn't have sewers, but it was an old mining tunnel.
Okay.
So the second twist is they find this hole and that takes them down so they can confront the Rat Man and his posse. And since it was the last adventure that I was running for them, I was hoping to outnumber them and have the rats eat them to death. But that didn't work out quite as well as I'd hoped. But the final confrontation with the boss,
right,
as it were.
Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty solid start. Well, it's a pretty solid session, rather. I think a good hook should be a call to action. So them being starving sounds more like a state of affairs to me than an actual hook.
Okay.
Seeing a rat run away with a sack of grain, that's a good hook. Finding a hole in a grain silo, that's a good hook. Because they call for action, either to chase down the rat and beat the shit out of it so they can have that food. And then it's going to raise questions of them being like, well, where was this rat going with food? Why is it carrying food away instead of just eating it there? Those are going to be interesting questions that they're going to ask and then go and investigate. The hole in the grain silo as well is a hook because they're going to be like, well, what's coming through the hole? Where is the food that's disappearing? And so then they go down there. And then I think your twist was pretty good. What was your twist?
The twist was finding the hole.
Oh, that's right.
silo.
Yeah, that totally works. Because then you start looking around at like, well, we've got all this missing food. And then boom, we've got a hole in here. Someone's stealing our food. So now we know why we have a shortage. That's a twist. And it's going to raise more questions, call more action. And then they get down there. And then another twist would have been finding out like rat men, or finding out that rat men were gearing up to run people out of town. I think you had a good solid session. This is just me nitpicking of, I would have done this differently, or I would have done this differently, or I wouldn't have called your hook a hook. And that's neither here nor there. Everyone's got their own GM style, and yours obviously worked for you because everyone had fun during the session, right?
Right.
Yeah. So what you did worked fine because everyone enjoyed it. So yeah, you had a good framework. And then I don't think you had to do any stat block creation because those monsters are already in the bestiary, which is great. I love bestiaries. I've got Star Wars Saga Threats of the Galaxy, and I use that one a lot for the Star Wars game. Less work on the GM is always better.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it was good. I personally, I would have detailed out a few more opposition, but then you were also working for a complete story in 3 hours.
Yeah.
Which doesn't leave you a whole lot of time for a lot of opposition.
Right. It was very much boom, 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 boom.
Yeah. And that's the problem with con games and stuff is you're like, oh, I've got all this great stuff I can use to tell a story, and then you're like, I don't have time for everything.
Yeah, and it was a pickup game.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure I told a little bit about this story before. Lucas was running D&D Adventure League the entire weekend, and he didn't get a chance to play once. I'm like, dude, I'll run you through Shadow of the Demon Lord. And his nephew and his nephew's friend were there, and so they joined in. And Michael from Redemption, I think Michael plays Tazi.
Yes.
So Michael from Redemption
Michael
was in there.
Waldschlager the third.
Yep, that'd be the one.
I always remember his name from the credits.
Yep. And so Lucas was the only one who had played Shadow of the Demon Lord. Okay. And I think Chris was also there. Burlew, the GM, Redemption. Pretty sure he was in it. Because I remember an extra person between Michael and Lucas.
Okay.
Yeah, so I had 5 people, and we had, it was a 3-ish hour game. So I was just kind of run them through point by point.
Hey, that works, and I think what you did was great. I mean, it obviously worked.
Yeah, they enjoyed it.
Yeah, and it's hard to plan anything out for a pickup game like that. But did you actually write down those points on a sheet of paper or anything, or did you just kind of come up with it on the fly in your head?
Just came up with it as I was doing it.
Okay.
Because that's when I said earlier, start with the what's going on, because that's kind of, what's actually happening step. That's usually what I do. I'm like, okay, what is going on that the players are interrupting?
Yeah.
Because players usually stumble upon adventure, or heck, someone hires them to go out on an adventure, but there's always something that the players butt heads with. So I start there. What are the players getting involved in? What's actually happening?
Yeah. I introduced the twists into the Sandcastle format because for storytelling, those are the actions that change acts in the storytelling. That first twist is what takes you from the first act into the second act. Where you've got some more investigation, more looking around, more hunting down the bad guy, or searching for clues or whatever. And that second twist is the reveal that leads to the climax. So it's like the identity of the bad guy, of whodunit, or that you finally find out exactly what that rat man in the caves underneath the city is planning on doing. Because once you find out that he's stealing and stockpiling food with a plan to starve and run out all the humans in the city, then you know that you have to go have the final showdown with him. And you have to go fight him or drive him out or kill him or whatever, whatever the players decided to do. So that's why I had the first twist and the second twist in the format. And that's what I try and make it when I run sessions. Like, this is still new to me as well. I've only been using it for the past couple months or maybe 3 months since that I've actually used it. But it's worked out great for me. And that's just that's what I try and make it, because I want to tell good stories. I think I'm a decent storyteller to begin with. I might have too high an opinion of myself, but I think that's a trap we all fall in at one time or another. We overestimate our abilities, but I'm trying to be better than what I am right now. So codifying and writing everything down has helped me kind of analyze what I do and how to do it better.
Okay.
Anyways, I have no idea if this episode actually helps anyone use use the Sandcastle episodes. I certainly hope so. If not, then it's an episode of me talking about what I do and Christopher talking about what he does, and me criticizing Christopher though he doesn't need it.
No, that's not true, because every time someone gives you constructive criticism, you learn something valuable.
That is very true. That is very true.
Which, in this instance, was the entire point of me talking things through. To be like, well, this is what I did, and this is kind of where I see each point. You're like, well, actually, it's like you said, specifically with the hook, wasn't really a good hook, because it was just, here's what's going on. There wasn't the call of adventure. So that's very good advice. Not necessarily for me, but for everyone who's listening, because we want to make sure that they get the important points. And the important points is your hook is a call to action. The players have to actually do something about it.
Yeah.
And the what I got out of it is hooks are a call to action. They require players to do something. It's not passive, it's active. And then each of the twists are not just scene breaks, but also, they're not set in stone. They're when things start lulling and where you need to push the story forward, throw in a twist.
Yeah. The main thing I want everyone to take away about the twists is that they give information. They answer questions that the players have, or that the characters have had since the hook started. And that additional information pushes the story forward, because then those characters say, we have light the bulb, like Gru says.
Light bulb.
You've got more information, and you've got a direction to move with that information, because that feels good too when you're in a story and you figure out more of what's going on, and you can continue moving the story ahead.
And continual movement of story is good movement.
Indeed. Although I like your beginning state of affairs for that Shadow of the Demon Lord game, where they started out starving. That's very interesting and fun. And that can be a good pre-hook, because, you're starving. What are you going to do about it? You see these 3 people have food. You can go beg them, beat them up, steal it, whatever,
And then that would be a great time for them, for the actual hook. As you're going to get food, you see the rat running away.
Yeah. Or you go to get your weekly ration, your weekly grain ration from the town silo. And
there you go.
The treasurer comes out and says, there's a hole in the silo. All the grain is gone. And then you're starving, you're hungry, and you know what to do with a sword. So you climb down this hole and try and figure out what's going on.
That's
cool.
actually a really good alternative to what, if I were to actually write it out, that would probably be a better way of doing it. I like that ration idea. And as you approach the ration, there's a closed sign.
Yeah. Or there's a closed sign, and then a rat runs off with a bag of grain or something.
A rat runs into.
Oh, get him! We'll cook him and take our ration of grain.
Yep, exactly.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. That is time for this episode. I figure that there are some unanswered questions or comments that you all might have. So if you want to reach out to me, please do so. You can email me at Devon, that's DEVON, at sharkbonepodcast.com. Or you can hit me up on Twitter. That's probably better, at @shark_bone on the Twitters.
I am at Eldritch Fire.
And thanks everyone for listening. With that, we'll just say good day and join the frenzy.
Have a good one. And remember, I got nothing for today. Shit.
Always check for holes in your silo.
There you go.
Oh my.
Let's see. Hold on. I can recover. And remember, always check for twists.
Ah, there you go.
There we go. All right.
I like it. That's a wrap. We're done. You don't have to go
All
home,
the
but you
news
can't
is
stay
fit
here.
for print.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Bye.